Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, with what is actually, if you can believe it, our final Bible lecture of the year. And obviously, this year has ended very differently than any previous year that I've certainly taught, and I think really that anybody has taught, and any student has experienced. And we are now not only at the end of the school year, which by the time you're watching this will end next week, I believe, with a Bible final. But we're also getting to the end of the book of John. In fact, you're going to be finishing the book of John yourself in our worksheets this week for John 19 through John 21. Today we're talking about John 18, which is going to pick up the story right where John 17 left off. John 17, in case you've misremembered what it talks about, is the story of Jesus praying for not only himself, but also for his disciples and for all believers. This is sometimes called Jesus' high priestly prayer, where he's praying for everyone that is going to follow him. The next story is in many ways the story of the trial of Jesus, although it is not the entire trial. There is a continuation of Jesus' trial in chapter 19, although I would say John 19 is primarily about the resurrection, or not the resurrection, the crucifixion. John chapter 20 is about the resurrection. But John chapter 18 is the trial. So there's a lot of interesting things that I think we can get into as we study John 18. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. Verse 1, John chapter 18. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, "Whom are you seeking?" And they answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Now when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. And he asked them again, "Whom are you seeking?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I have told you that I am he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled of which he spoke, of those whom you gave me I have lost none." Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father hath given me?" Then the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. And they led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Now it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. And you guys will remember that from, I believe, John chapter 16 is where that statement is made. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. This is, by the way, more than likely John. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and went in with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the servants and officers who made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves. And Peter stood with them and warmed himself. The high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus answered him, "I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in temples where the Jews always meet, and in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I have said to them. Indeed, they know what I said." And when he said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, "Do you answer the high priest like that?" Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. Now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" And he denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ears Peter had cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Then Peter then denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning. But they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Ironic. Pilate then went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you." Then Pilate said to them, "You take him and judge him according to your law." Therefore the Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he should die. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews, and said to them, "I find no fault in him. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" Then they all cried again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. And by the way, that word robber actually in the Greek means a zealot, which specifically means more like a terrorist, someone who attacked Rome and tried to kill Romans. And that's where we end. That's the end of John chapter 18. Kind of seems like a cliffhanger, because it is. Go read John 19 and 20 and 21. They're really good. And find out how that story ends. But we'll stop you there. Hopefully you do that after this lecture's over. And instead, let's go back and talk about what just happened. So this is primarily a narrative text. We don't find a lot of applicational stuff here in this passage, although every passage of the Bible has some application for our lives. But this is primarily narrative text. And what we see happening here to begin with is Jesus' betrayal to the forces of the Pharisees. And we can see immediately that the Pharisees are not physically present with him. And the reason that they sent Judas was, it appears to be twofold. Number one, they wanted to know where Jesus was going to be. And we can see here in John's narrative that Judas took the soldiers that had been assigned to him to a place that Jesus often used for teaching. Okay, this grove, this garden that Jesus entered was apparently one that was common for him to use. And so Judas and his men were lying in wait there. Of course, Jesus knows this, so he walked right into the trap. But Judas is there hoping to attack Christ and ambush Christ there, and of course that succeeds. The other thing that Judas was along for was clearly the men being sent to kidnap or capture Jesus were not familiar enough with him to positively identify him. So what I think the Pharisees were afraid of is one of his disciples would claim to be Jesus. Maybe Peter would claim up and claim, "I'm Jesus," and they'd bring him the wrong person, and that Jesus himself would escape, and he would go about doing his thing. And of course, that was not something that the Pharisees actually needed to worry about, because Jesus knew he was going to die, and he let himself die, right? Jesus could have called down angel armies to wipe out the Jews had he so desired, but he did not. He intended to do what his Father had asked him to do, and to die on the cross. Now, we see several details. Number one, we see that Simon Peter, doing his normal bullheaded thing, cuts somebody's ear off. We do not get the detail that Jesus put this guy's ear back on like we do in Luke. We do, though, have another interesting detail that's not really referenced in any of the other three gospel accounts, and that's apparently that when Jesus announces who he is, specifically he says, "I am he," I think when he said that, in English it does not have any power. It's just a phrase, "I am he." Are you the teacher of this class? I am he, right? It's just a phrase. But that word "I am," that phrase "I am" in Hebrew, is reference to Yahweh or Jehovah. It literally means the self-existing one. Okay, that's what Yahweh literally means, like the one who exists. That's kind of what it means. And so when it says "I am he," again, we're getting this through Greek. So what Jesus actually said, we don't know, because John didn't write it in Hebrew, which is probably what Jesus was speaking, or Aramaic. But I tend to think that Jesus said directly, "I am God." Okay, so when it says "I am he," I think there was a little bit more power to this. Why do I think that? And again, I would not die on this hill. This is not firm Christian doctrine. But let's read verse 5 and 6. They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to them, "I am he." And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Now when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. So these are the guys sent to capture Jesus, along with Judas. And when Jesus responds with "I am he," these guys fall to the ground. Okay, so this was not because they believed Jesus. Obviously, they're there to capture him, and they know what's going to happen to him. He's going to die, and yet they are physically forced to the ground. There's got to be something going on there. I tend to think that's because he said, "I am God." That's what he said, very clearly. Knocked them to their feet, because of course, Jesus not only could call down angel armies, he could destroy the entire planet with a word. The face of Jesus, fully glorified, would blind us, right? That's why God covered himself as he passed by on the mountaintop when Elijah wanted to see him. Because he said, Elijah, if you saw me face to face, you die. You can't handle it. No human can. And we see, I think, a pale glimmer of that here. They're knocked to the floor. Anyway, that's just a cool detail. Kind of a rabbit's trail for sure. The next thing we see is that Jesus is hauled before two Jewish leaders. Now, we don't have a detailed account of these trials like we actually do in Luke and Mark, who went into much closer detail on what exactly was said at these trials. So John is definitely kind of painting with a broad brush, which is very interesting because, again, as I mentioned when I was reading, verse 15 talks about Simon Peter followed Jesus and so did another disciple. Most people, including myself, believe that that other disciple was John. And so clearly John was able to get into the court proceedings. So we have two disciples that were present in the actual court proceedings themselves. For sure, there could have been more, but we know for sure that there's two. There's this other disciple, most people believe it's John, and then there's Peter, who's out in the courtyard warming himself with the servants. And we'll remember that throughout the night, Peter's denying that he is with Jesus, and we know that the trial lasted all night, and of course we know that it must have ended near dawn because that's when roosters crow. The rooster crows. Jesus is being brought out of the trial. He makes eye contact with Peter because remember, the book of Mark tells us that Jesus looked at Peter. Peter saw him. That's when the rooster crowed, right? We have all these details. John doesn't give them to us, which again is surprising. John was physically there. All right, most people think, again, could this have been another disciple? Sure. I'm, again, not going to die on that hill. If you are positive that was Nathaniel, that's great. But most people think it was John. So he gives us remarkably little detail. So he tells us a little bit about what Peter's doing, and then he tells us about Jesus being questioned before the high priest. Now, there's a little bit of confusion here, what's going on, and you have to kind of understand Jewish priest politics, so I'll give you a really shortened version. Why does the Bible distinctly tell us that he was taken to Annas first and then to Caiaphas? Well, basically what had happened was this. Annas was the high priest, and due to some complex political rambling involving Rome, Annas was forced to resign. Basically, the Romans said, look, we don't like him anymore. Get him out of power. So Annas resigned, but his daughter had married a guy by the name of Caiaphas, and the Jewish leaders elected Caiaphas instead. And of course, Caiaphas, since he's married to Annas' daughter, is really just Annas by another name. And in fact, what clearly was happening, this gives us an interesting window into how it worked, is that Caiaphas would send people to Annas to make decisions. And if Annas couldn't make a decision, then Caiaphas might get involved. So effectively, Annas is still the high priest, even though he's not high priest in title. And again, by the way, this tells us how corrupt the actual position was. The high priest originally was the advocate for the entire nation of Israel, and instead it's being tossed around like a political plaything by these guys, right? Really embarrassing. That I don't think the point that John's going for, because I think John's readers already understood that about the priesthood, but for us modern English-speaking people, it's really apparent that the priest's position was embarrassing. Now, the high priest asks Jesus, who do you say that you are? What are you saying about yourself? What have you told your disciples in private? And Jesus says simply, look, I've spoken in public. I've spoken in the synagogues. You know what I've said about myself. You've been there. Everyone in this room has heard me speak. I've said nothing in secret that I haven't said elsewhere, right? You might go, wait a second, Jesus definitely just taught his disciples at various points throughout his ministry. Yes, that's true. But that's not really what Jesus is talking about here. Jesus is saying the content of my message has been spoken for all to hear. There's no secret information. Jesus didn't say, hey, step 2 of being a believer is this, disciples, whisper, whisper, whisper. He said it very clearly on a number of occasions, and you can go and highlight them in your Bible in the book of John. And it's very simple. I'll summarize it for you very quickly. He who hears my command, keep it. Or do what Jesus says. That's it. That's the command. Who is Jesus? He's said it literally dozens of times. He's God. Lord, Master, Creator. He's God. So Jesus is God. Do what he says. And he's come that we may have eternal life. Okay, Jesus has said this dozens of times. He has said it in almost every chapter of the book of John. And yet the high priest says, well, what is your actual teachings, right? And he gives them, again, let it be known that God has a little bit of a sense of humor. Jesus definitely responds in a sarcastic way. I mean, I sense the sarcasm here. Jesus says, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple where the Jews always meet. And in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. Okay? You can hear not the attitude. Attitude has a negative connotation. Jesus is perfect. But you can kind of hear the ridiculousness of the situation. Jesus says, look, everybody here knows what I said. I'm not repeating it for you. Okay? Because you know. You're asking me questions you know the answer to. Right? Which, as humans, we do sometimes. But Jesus isn't having it. He says, look, you know the answer. I'm not going to tell you. Jesus is slapped. And Jesus, I really appreciate this point that John's making here. I think what Jesus says in response to being slapped could be applied to the entirety of Jesus' trial. Jesus says, if I have spoken of evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Right? Jesus is about to be put through a horrific torture event for doing good. No evil. Jesus was a perfect man. He'd never done anything. We see the conclusion of Peter's story. We've gone over this in all four Gospels. John doesn't give us any information that we didn't already know, although it's nice to have it confirmed one final time. We notice that he apparently was sent to Caiaphas, and John entirely leaves out Caiaphas' conversation with Jesus. We find these in Mark, Luke, and Matthew, but John doesn't talk about this. And by the way, I think this is a reflection of John being written last. He did not feel the need to talk about this conversation. It had already been written about, and so was unnecessary to write about in John's own book. We see that then Caiaphas takes Jesus to the Praetorium. The Praetorium is the Roman auxiliary fort, sometimes called the Antonine Fortress, attached to the temple, which would have served as Pilate's headquarters. And they throw Pilate in, and there is just some ridiculous irony going on here. First off, they physically drag Jesus to this location, and they throw him over. But they can't go inside, because if they went inside, they would have defiled themselves. Okay? And again, I think the sarcasm dripping off John's pen must have been immense. Because think about what they had been doing for the last 12 hours. They had been accusing the God of the universe and slapping the God of the universe and ridiculing the God of the universe and spitting on him and beating him and falsely accusing him and lying about him, right? They have spent 12 hours probably doing some of the most sinfully rebellious things in the history of time. And they're worried that if they step into a Roman fort, they are going to be defiled. I mean, the irony is massive, right? This is ridiculous that they're concerned about this. They want to kill the God of the universe, and they're worried about defiling themselves stepping into the Roman fort. It's just, that is so ridiculous, it's got to be funny. So Pilate says, what accusation do you have against this man? Notice that the Jews can't even give him an answer. They say, if he were not an evildoer, would we not have delivered him up to you? So basically, they responded to Pilate's question by saying, well, just take him. Like, we wouldn't have given you somebody that wasn't guilty. That's not even an answer. They don't even answer Pilate. They can't even come up with something that he's guilty of. Pilate says, no, you take him and judge him according to your law. And then the ridiculousness gets even higher. Therefore the Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. Okay, period. Stop. Let's just think about this. Okay? It's not lawful for them to put anyone to death. But if they hand Jesus off to somebody else and have them kill them for them, that is good. Okay, I'm kind of reminded of the Amish, right? I was in Amish country for a vacation with my parents, and I saw an Amish guy riding in the passenger seat of a van talking on a cell phone. And I asked my parents, I said, I thought the Amish people didn't have any technology. And my dad, who had read up on the Amish before we'd gone to this place, said, oh, actually, Amish people can use cars. They just can't drive cars. So it's fine for them to ride in the car. That's not sinful. It's driving the car that's sinful. And they can own cell phones. They can't own landlines. Landlines are sinful. Cell phones are fine. The Jews are the same way. They say it's wrong to kill. By the way, it is wrong to kill. Thou shalt not kill. Okay, right? We know that's true. But they say it's wrong to kill. We can't kill him because he hasn't done anything wrong. I mean, they didn't say that, but it's true, right? But you can kill him. We'll hand him over to you to kill him. And that's like taking a gun and putting it on a table, pointed at someone you've tied up, and then going and grabbing a stick and using the stick to pull the trigger and saying, "Oh, I didn't touch the gun when it killed that guy. I just made the gun go off. I didn't kill him. I just had Pilate kill him for me. I have no responsibility here." Ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. And again, they're not defiling themselves by not going into Pilate's presence. And they're not killing Jesus by having Pilate do it. It's like somehow in their brains, they missed the point. They were following the letter of the law, but they totally missed the idea. I'm right. This isn't a surprise. Jesus demonstrates that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the other Jewish religious leaders are about this again and again and again and again. So this is nothing new, but it's just another evidence that they don't care about what God said. They care about keeping the exact letter of the law. And then we have a really interesting conversation between Pilate and Jesus. Probably the most detailed conversation between Pilate and Jesus. We have some pushback. So Pilate goes in and he talks to Jesus. He says, "Okay, they're calling you the king of the Jews. Are you calling yourself the king of the Jews? Why does this matter?" Well, for Pilate, it does kind of matter because he is there to keep peace in Jerusalem. And if somebody's around calling themselves king, he's already got 3 kings that he doesn't particularly like in the Herod brothers anyway. So this might cause political upheaval. He might lose his job. He doesn't want that kind of thing. So he comes and he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus responds and says, "Look, are you asking for you or are you just saying what they have said out there?" And Pilate kind of goes, "Well, I'm not a Jew. Your priests threw you in here, so what have you done? Help me out here. I'm trying to figure out what's going on." And Jesus answers and he says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, and win, by the way, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Therefore Pilate said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." So basically, even in this moment, Jesus points out the real reason he's there. He's there for the truth. He is the truth, in fact. Not just there for the truth, he is truth. The truth is that Jesus loved humans and that he came and he lived a sinless life and he died for us, and under his own power he rose again. And because of that, we can have a relationship with him and a relationship with the Father. We can enjoy eternal life in Jesus' name. That's the truth. And that's what he came to tell people. And he is a king, and he is going to rule over all of humanity. And he's going to judge all of humanity. And he's going to do all of these awesome things. And when he does return the second time, he's going to come and triumph as a king, and he's going to destroy his enemies. He's going to do all that stuff. But not yet. His kingdom's far from here. And Pilate, to his very small credit, asks a very good question. What is truth? Unfortunately, we don't have any record of Jesus giving Pilate the answer. Although the answer was right in front of him. What is truth? Jesus. That's the answer. And whether Pilate actually wanted to know or whether Pilate said that as he walked out the door, we can't tell. We don't have enough context to know. But he does ask a good question, a question that all of us should be asking all the time. And of course, the answer is always Jesus. What is the truth? Let's turn to Jesus' teaching. Jesus is the truth. Therefore, the things that Jesus taught are reflections of the truth. And they're what we need to know. Finally, and this is a last sad aside before we get into the crucifixion itself, we have the freeing of Barabbas. So apparently there was a tradition for the Romans to release a Jewish prisoner. This was to keep the Jews happy and to stop them from revolting. And Pilate tries to get out of this sticky situations by giving Jesus up. He knows the crowds like Jesus. He was in the city 7 days ago when they were screaming, "Hosanna, the king has arrived." Okay? He's not dumb. He's done his research. In fact, we know from Luke he's been punting Jesus between himself and Herod for the better part of a day. He's had time to figure this out. And yet the Jews call for Barabbas. And Pilate releases him, despite the fact that Barabbas was an actual criminal. And Pilate very much would have liked to have killed him. Okay? He was an anti-Roman terrorist. And yet the crowd's opinion made Pilate keep Jesus and eventually led him to kill Jesus. And that's the story of John 19. So, unfortunately, because of how the lectures worked out, depressing way to end our lectures of the year. But there is hope. Because the crucifixion's next, and that's not where it ends. John 19, fortunately, isn't the last chapter in the book. It's John 20 and 21. Jesus is risen. Jesus is risen, risen indeed. That's where this is going. So this is sad. Jesus not in a good position because of the sinful action of the Jews. But it's okay, because Jesus is going to rise again, and by rising again, he is going to purchase salvation for every single one of us. And that is awesome. So hopefully that truth encourages you not only today, but for the rest of your week and the rest of your summer.